ministry here and also work with our discipleship team and prayer team. And we're just so grateful to have you here this morning. This is a well sought after speaker that we love featuring, and it's Todd Mulliken, who actually practices nearby, right? Within 10 minutes probably. So we're grateful though that we are in his circumference of where he'll go to speak, because we love having him on a variety of topics. It's not his first time at the Lunch and Learn, so we're going to welcome him back. But just want to introduce myself and welcome you here. I'm handing it over to Pastor Dan to formally introduce Todd Mulliken.
Thank you, Stacia, very, very much. Todd, I had the privilege of meeting him as he was a father carrying in furniture and things to his daughter's apartment, or actually a little house. And I went over and met him, and my daughter also lived at the same place. They're moving at the same time. So I just know him as a stud who could carry stuff around and heavy objects and do those things and was direct. That's your story to tell. But then later on, in coming into this position, I found out that, this guy who can carry furniture also is a very prolific counselor who comes alongside a number of people in a number of different topics and settings, and delightfully have referred people to him ever since I began this position. And with that, Todd, it's grateful to have you here. I'll move the furniture for you if you'd like that. But anyways, come on up and share with us today. So grateful you're here.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Dan. All right. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about anxiety today. And which do you think is more common? ADHD, depression, or anxiety? How many think anxiety is the most common? How many think depression is? How many think ADHD is? No. Well, still anxiety is taking the most, about 28% lifetime prevalence in the world. So 28% of humanity will be vulnerable to some type of anxiety disorder sometime through their story. And depression is a close second. ADHD is probably around 10% for kiddos, 4 to 5% for adults. But it's so wonderful to talk about anxiety because it is the most common thing we struggle with nationally, internationally. Obviously, as you know, since the pandemic, things have probably doubled with anxiety as well as depression. Things are easing back a bit. But I thought it'd be good to talk about what anxiety is actually, what are the most common ways it shows itself, how we can manage it, how we can walk alongside our kiddos or grandkids that wrestle with that, irregardless of their ages, right? And then really answer questions that you have, comments that you have that can help us all learn more about how we can, with God's help, really manage anxiety and what it's about. So I know that most of us can probably relate to anxiety at some form, and any mental health issue is really on a continuum. So I know for me a year ago now, the reason I was thinking about it as I was driving in a year ago this week, I was applying for a passport because mine had expired because I was going on a mission trip in August. So my mission pastor asked me to kind of come along to this with this group to go to Colombia to work on walking alongside people that are in abject poverty and look at the mental health concerns of that community. So I was glad to do it. Hadn't been on a mission trip my whole life. My spouse did a lot of the mission trips while I stayed home with the kiddos. So I was just grateful to go. Hadn't been out of the country for a long time, so passport had expired. So got all the ducks in a row, put my passport in. Mine went to Philly. My wife decided to do hers too. Hers went to Dallas, not rushed. Mine was rushed. June 3rd. Meet it by August 5th. Okay, we're good. 6 to 8 weeks, they said. All right. And then, so it's coming. She gets hers. I'm not getting mine. I can look online. Hey, not processed yet. I can look online. Hey, not processed yet. Then you can't talk to an actual human until 2 weeks before you need it for a flight. Okay, I'm seeing some nods, some validation. I appreciate that. So 2 weeks before I call, I reach somebody, and they say, yeah, we don't see it processed yet. We're sure it'll probably be processed by the flight date. But if you'd like to, you can drive to Detroit tomorrow or fly to Detroit tomorrow. We have an opening we have an opening at our Detroit office tomorrow. I said, oh, golly, I've got a few things going on. So they said, well, we do have an opening at our Minneapolis office the day before you leave. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine, okay? So I have a propensity to worry anyway, and so what was fascinating for me, folks, is I left my house in Edina, and I drove all the way to the Eden Prairie flagship Lifetime here, where I work out twice a year. And I was driving, I was driving there, and it's a 17-and-a-half-minute drive. We've gone there forever. We usually just get the pool membership during the summer. And for 17 and a half minutes, that's all I thought about was what if, what if, what if, what if. And I didn't even realize, I don't think I sped, I don't think I went through a stop sign, but I couldn't tell you anything about my trip of that 17 and a half minutes. Does that make sense? All of a sudden, I was in the flagship parking lot, and I realized I had ruminated. That's a key word to remember from today, rumination. I was ruminating the whole time about what happens if I don't get the passport. Now, it's not bizarre or horrible, but it's just a little sampling about what happens with anxiety and what happens when it runs amok. And I don't know about you folks, but for some reason I just couldn't remind myself about Philippians 4, right? 6 and 7, and be anxious about nothing. Okay, good luck with that. By prayer and petition, give your requests and present that to God, right? And then He will guard our hearts. And then it says, also think about what is wrong with your life, the worst 3 things you have going on, and that you don't measure up. Oh, he doesn't say that. He says, think about whatever is what? True, noble, of excellence, of praise. Right? Think on those things and put them into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So I wasn't like in a shame storm, but I realized I just naturally, the forgotten God, right, the Holy Spirit, I didn't invite Him into it. Makes sense. I didn't invite Him in minute 2, minute 3, like, hey, what do you think about this? What's going on here? I'm really worried. As wise counselor, what would you have for me? As somebody that's groaning to the Father on my behalf, what would you have for me? And I just didn't do it. I just kind of stuck in my rumination house. I built a nice another room in my what-if house. I've got a big what-if house, by the way. Lots of rooms, high rent district. And so I'm just validating that I think it's a common thing that people battle, right? And so how do we manage that? How do we walk alongside our kiddos that battle that? How do we not be defined by this, my 17 and a half minutes, but be more defined by how God sees me and holds me in that? How do we not get into a place of shame where my faith must not be enough because I still do this? Or, does that make sense? All those kinds of things. So how do we deal with that? So what anxiety actually is repressed fear. And the 4 most common symptoms of what we call generalized anxiety disorder, which is the most common mental health disorder in the anxiety disorders, is excessive worry. The big one is the second one, I think. So the excessive worry takes you a lot to what if. So a lot of the clients I work with, adolescents, adults, I try to have them go from what if to what is. So I wasn't doing any what is stuff in the car. I was in what if all the time. So excessive worry is one symptom. The second one, I think that's the hardest to treat, is restlessness, right? The good news and bad news about anxiety is there's a lot of energy, and that's the good news. It gets us out of the bed, like depression can immobilize us and just like ground us, right? So with anxiety, typically the energy is going. We have lots of energy, but it's in restlessness, and especially it's in rumination, where we think, we rethink, we hash, we rehash. We have a hard time redirecting. The third symptom kind of sounds like the first 2. It's feeling keyed up and on edge. So we're just kind of going, right? We're worried and we're anxious, and we're either controlling our universe or we're avoiding everything. So typically those are the 2 natural reactions for you and I with anxiety, is we either want to manage the restlessness I'm feeling at 3 in the morning and sent an email to my boss about my 2 o'clock meeting tomorrow just to make sure I told them what I want to say, because I'm really worried about the meeting, and I'm in the what if house. Or I'm going to manage my kiddo because they have what I have a little bit, and I want to make sure that they don't do what I've been doing and what I battle. So I'm going to overmanage them. Or along the continuum, I might be on the other side, or I might just avoid hard issues because I don't feel safe in the issue. I might avoid having a difficult conversation because what if something goes bad? Right, so those are, maybe be asking yourself, where do you tend to go when the rumination's loud, right? Do we tend to go to kind of over-managing to relax, or do we tend to avoid to relax? Those are the two ways we deal with it. Then the fourth and final symptom is irritability, where when anxiety is loud, a lot of times we're irritable, and sometimes it comes out, sometimes it stays in, but it's we can wrestle with irritability. So that's what generalized anxiety disorder is. Rumination ends up overseeing all of that, and that's what we battle the most. The other most common anxiety disorder is called SAD, not seasonal affective disorder, but social anxiety disorder. So this is a helpful one to know. Like, it's one of the most common mental health disorders in the world, right? And the typical way it shows itself is people that really get anxious about public speaking. But the anxiety isn't just like introversion on steroids. Because, by the way, if somebody's naturally introverted, like I wish I had $1 for every adolescent I've seen that's gone to a big high school campus and they feel like they're less than, and really they're just beautifully introverted. And they beautifully actually love quiet. And they love 2 or 3 friends versus working the room. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're amazing. But they feel less than, right? Because we still have kind of an extroverted culture. So thankfully, we've had books on introversion come out the last 15, 20 years that really celebrate the power of quiet. And how many verses do we see in the scriptures about be still and know, right? So people sometimes will feel inadequate because they're in social situations. So sometimes it's just reframing introversion into like, hey, this is how God has made me, and here's what I'm for with my introversion. So when I'm going into scary situations, they used to be, I was like, no, I'm just look for some introverts. I see what the extroverts are doing. That's their deal. That's their thing. Here's my thing. We're good, right? It's okay. I get to just be comfortable not saying things until I think about them first. What an idea, right? As an extrovert, I don't do that. Actually, my wife and I, it's interesting, after the first year of marriage, maybe I told you this, I probably did it at a marriage thing, but we didn't realize we were introverted and extroverted so differently. And I really was kind of concerned, like maybe she needed some friends, and maybe she kind of didn't do enough during the day, and she was quite concerned that I wasn't talking deeply with people, right? So we got really judgy on each other versus accepting the natural ways we're each wired. So sometimes social anxiety disorder is actually not that. It's just folks that battle introversion and helping them reframe that. Other times it really is the real deal. And what usually is the biggest deal is the physiological response with anxiety. So remember that any mental health concern is like any physical health concern, right? So most of what we notice about mental health issues is there's a genetic predisposition that is kind of sitting in there, and then certain levels of stress will ignite it. There certainly are some cases where there's no genetic predisposition and it's just trauma only, right? There's some of those. And there's some situations where there isn't any really significant stress, but there's still a truckload of genetic markers that make the person vulnerable to the anxiety, right? So it's typically a complex interaction between both. And so what social anxiety is much more about realizing, oh, there I go, oops, there's that physical reaction. Oh yeah, and here's what is true about, that's why it's there. Yeah, that's why I'm not really excited about talking in front of a bunch of people. Those are the two most common types of anxiety disorders. Let's talk a little bit about risk factors next. What makes somebody vulnerable to it? Well, the first thing is actually, genetic markers. So one of the first things I work with people that have an anxiety issue is, hey, do you think dad or mom had a kind of a worry thing naturally in their story? And more often than not, one will say, oh, yeah, I see that. Oh, okay, that helps me understand why I maybe have that and my sibling doesn't. Right? We're in the same home, but, oh, thank you, that helps me understand. Does that make sense? That helps me understand what's going on there. So one of the risk factors is just a genetic vulnerability to it. And the other one we notice that's non-experiential is what we call natural anxiety sensitivity, right, where they're sensitive very quickly. I don't know if you've ever had this, if you've raised kiddos, where some of the times the kid comes right out of the womb and they're just like, whoa, easily startled. I remember our firstborn came out going, let's go, right? Okay, well, let's go, right? And she still is like that. So if we bumped into each other out there randomly and we just bumped into each other, we both would go, oh, good to see you, Ashley. Oh, good to see you, Dad. Oh. If I bumped into my second one, she'd go, hey, didn't think you'd be here, Dad. Yeah, how's it going? That's good. I just finished my nursing degree and I'm getting married next week. I'm going to do this. Oh, really? Yeah. And she's going, yeah, God's got it. We're good. Oh, okay. Makes sense. So some people just naturally are wired in a way that they're more easily startled. We call that anxiety sensitivity. More lasted 10, 15, 20 years. If I had another hour to speak, I'd talk about sensory disorders, right? Some people just have natural sensations where their body responds in a way that's more, just feel things more deeply, whether that's due to a lack of endorphins in their body, so they don't have shielding from pain and don't experience as much pleasure. It could be a variety of things. So anyway, there are different natural biological factors, right, that can make somebody vulnerable. Now, the two biggest non-biological factors tend to be, one is kind of a parenting exposure thing. So I believe very strongly what's called kind of an affirmation-based home. The affirmation-based home looks at who the child can become, looks at their best traits, has healthy discipline, healthy correction, walking alongside them in that. But we're generally giving the feel to the child that they are enough. They are loved and cherished by God. We create what we call in my field a secure attachment style. So when I mess up as a parent, as a good leader, I own that. If I have my own anxiety, which I do, I let them know that was my stuff, and I took it out on you. I love you. It's on me. Versus, well, I'm a leader. I'm not supposed to. What if they think I'm not perfect? Well, actually, they have a better chance of knowing Jesus, and they have a better chance of respecting you and I as leaders, right? So that's one of the factors. The shame-based home is what makes people more vulnerable to anxiety as well. So the shame-based versus affirmation-based. We want to avoid the shame. Shame-based is typically parents that kind of look for what's wrong with their kids, give them the idea they will never measure up, and then unintentionally they control the home with their emotions. So the kiddo is kind of walking on glass, wondering when they might disappoint one of their parents again. So we're noticing through lots of research that shame-based homes can ignite the genetic markers of anxiety that make them more vulnerable to go to that what-if place. Make sense? So let's talk a little bit next about, is it okay I just keep talking for a little more? Is that all right? Keep going. And I'm an extrovert, so if you got a question, raise a hand. And is that, oh, no, you got to process. Sorry, is that okay? Sorry, my bad. Okay, we're good? Okay, great. It's all good. So there's lots of comorbidities. So if you've had yourself or a friend or your own child, adult child, grandkid wrestle with mental health issues, which is very, very common, one of the things we really struggle with in my field is what really is this that's going on, right? What is true about what this is? So there's a 62% chance, latest research, that if somebody has an anxiety problem, they will also have a vulnerability to depression. And what I think is really important to know about that is like what is actually true, meaning is what is true is they're naturally a worrier. You know, it's kind of what their natural bent is. They just kind of worry, they overcompensate for the worry sometimes. If they're naturally a worrier, then sometimes the body gets tired, right? And that's when depressive episodes can come in, like an emotional hangover, and just kind of flatten the kiddo, flatten you and me out. And we get tired, we get fatigued. We have a hard time getting going. We have what's called psychomotor retardation, just hard to get going because we're just exhausted from the fear, right? Or is it more true that there's a natural propensity to depressive episodes and the anxiety is just kind of a thing that occasionally comes with it? Makes sense? And what I've seen a fair amount in my practice is people that have been diagnosed with depression, but actually they have untreated anxiety. Does that make sense? The fear keeps circling and coming in, and it tires them out. So we can treat them for the depression. Here's some ways you can get going, and some medicinal options, some meditation options through prayer. Here's some things we can do. Run towards things you love. Enjoy, find the things you enjoy and get going. But if the worry is continuing, the body's still going to get tired, right? So how do we just pay attention to that? The other thing we're noticing, the biggest thing in my field the last 10 years, like the last 10 years when I've gone to these national conferences, the ones that have the most breakout sessions are ADHD. Because look at this. So let's say you have a 16-year-old that is really struggling in school. And they're really anxious about it, and they want to go to school. They think school's stupid. And they just are really anxious and don't want to go, and they get really upset about it. And you notice, you might not notice, but they're having a hard time comprehending what they're reading. And they're kind of like, there are a lot of start and stops. They love starting, they hate finishing. And they're anxious. Well, sometimes those people have been diagnosed with anxiety, whereas really what's going on is their untreated attention deficit stuff is causing them to be anxious. And they're in school for a lot of minutes of their life, right? And that's a lot of time to be in a place where they feel less than, they feel inadequate, and they feel like they don't measure up. So we want to know that because sometimes that helps us with the comorbidity issue. And comorbidity means somebody can have more than one disorder at the same time. Make sense? So sometimes we miss that. I think the other times we miss it is when there is bipolar disorder in the family, we don't talk about it, and we think they just get kind of anxious sometimes, and they get really they get really kind of like almost reckless in their anxiety, and they get really edgy, and they're really like intense and really different. Just, wow, that's just not them. Well, anxiety tends to be pervasive. Bipolar tends to be episodic. Does that make sense? Depression tends to be more episodic. Anxiety is more of a pervasive issue that stays there a lot. So I bring up this stuff just because I hear a lot from people when I give speaking about, hey, my adolescent has been diagnosed with this, what do you think? So I'm just letting you know kind of what we notice in the trenches, what national research is saying about all that. So before I'm done, let's talk about some strategies that we can use for us, that we can help our kids with, so we're walking alongside our adult children, our young kids, our grandkids, wherever we're at in our story. So I think what makes anxiety trickier to treat, well, let me first say this. Typically what we talk about is the anxiety triad. So what I try to treat with the anxiety triad is three things. We're trying to manage the physical reaction of anxiety, right? So I got off the phone and there was an elephant sitting on my chest. I'm not going to make my flight. It's all going to go bad. I'm not going to know what to do. Who am I to get to replace me? All my what if levers were just going, phew, and my rumination was go over here, and I felt like there was an elephant sitting on my chest. I didn't have a panic attack, but I had panicky feelings, right? So that's the first step, is how do we help ourselves, others that we love, manage that physical stuff when it's noisy. Otherwise, we make our decision about what we're going to do in life when the physical stuff is noisy and I'm feeling most vulnerable, and that's when we don't want to make decisions. I would have called the missions pastor and said, I'm not going, right? So I, for some reason, was able to not make that decision. I can tell you the rest of the story at some point if we got time. It's kind of boring, but it's kind of fun. Stay tuned. So that's the first step, is manage the physical. And there's lots of ways we can do that, and I'll talk about that. The second step is redirecting the thinking. And we get that great messaging from Paul, because what Paul also says in the book of Philippians in that same chapter, after he says, think about whatever is, first of all, hey, whatever it is, bring the Lord into it. Just let him join you. The Holy Spirit indwells you and I, so just bring him in and just have some popcorn and watch the show with him and say, what's going on here? Right? Slow down and bring the Holy Spirit in. The Holy Spirit's already there, but you know what I mean? Invite him in. So the redirecting of our thoughts is basically learning how to go from what if to what is true. And that's what Paul said, here's what is true. Think about whatever is true. And then later in the chapter he says, oh, by the way, I've learned the secret in life. And I'm going, please tell me. And it is, I've learned to be content, right? Whether I'm in plenty or I'm in want, right? And that's what I work with a lot of my patients on and myself on, is the pursuit of contentment in Christ, irregardless of the maladies, the joys, the sorrows, right? The blessings and the shadows, right? So the second step is, how do we help them? I remember I was working with a soccer player one time, and they were a really talented player, and they were in the section semifinal game, and they had 2 goals, and then one of their shots went off the pipe and didn't go in. They won the game 4-2. The person is a captain, it's back in the day, and they were a junior, so that's like unusually good. Well, they won 4-2. These 3 things happened. What do you think they thought about all night? Right, the one that didn't go in, right? Now, I was referred to that person because they actually were thinking, the what if got so loud that they didn't want to play soccer next year, right? Because it's so loud, right? So what I just invited them into, and it wasn't like, oh, wasn't this an amazing moment? The therapist is amazing. It was just a practical thing to think about, to lean into, to see if this practice would help a little bit. I said, look at your watch, and when you go to that what if place and rewind the films about the woulda, coulda, shoulda, it's fine to do that a little bit, but if you do it for 20 minutes, then at least give yourself 20 minutes, at least as much time. I know it'll feel like forever. I know it'll feel stupid, but give yourself 20 minutes to watch the beauty of what happened. Run towards the light of the 2 goals you had and the gifts you are. You're not going to be a narcissist. You're going to be more content. You're not going to be in a room full of mirrors. You're just going to get out of the what-if house. So when we go from what if to what is, let's at least spend as much time on what is actually true. Because the mind and the brain will still take us to, yeah, but what if? What if? And sometimes the what if isn't like horrible. Like I don't say, oh, don't ever what if. I just go, hey, when you what if, and go to worst. It's okay to say, hey, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? That's a reasonable thing to do, right? Okay, what's the worst thing going to happen? That's different than rumination, right? Rumination is thinking, rethinking, really getting petrified, having panic disorder, having panic attacks, because the rumination doesn't get redirected. So first step, manage the physical. Second step, redirect the thoughts. And the third step is guiding the behavioral choices, meaning like, okay, the choice I'm going to make even though it's going to seem strange, is actually based on what is true. Now, sometimes the truth is your house is on fire, so call the fire department. So it doesn't mean truth is always amazing, right? Sometimes the truth is really hard. So this isn't about trying to deflect from trauma or deflect from pain or deflect from toxicity. It's more about redirecting actually a worst case scenario worry into actually what is true. And now the decision I'm going to start making is more based on what is true. And I'm be grateful that I get to do that. I talk a lot about get-tos versus have-tos. We're in worry when we're in what if. There's a lot of have-tos versus get-tos. What do we get to do, right? Now, all of what I just said is what I would call defensive strategies, meaning what happens when you are in that what-if place, when you're a child or you're an adolescent, when your grandkid's in that what-if place. It's kind of, here's some things we can try to do to slow down, breathe through it, pray it up, see what we can do, redirect the thinking, watch it. The game is slowed down. For those of you that are athletes in here, people become really good at their sport or their activity, and when they do, the game slows down, right? The game is slower. And for me, when I hung up the phone, the game was way too fast. Right? The game wasn't slow enough for me during that 17 and a half minutes for me to slow down, breathe through it. Philippians 4:6, I get to do that. Oh, forgot. Oh. So the game goes too fast. So we want to train our neural pathways, if you will. We want to train our brain through the help of Jesus and the Holy Spirit to slow things down a little bit. And we get to do that. Now, there are certainly cases where, and this is what's really important to remember about any mental health issue you ever hear talked about, is somebody could have a mild propensity to worry once in a while and get kind of edgy, all the way to somebody that has crippling panic attacks on a regular basis. Somebody could kind of bring the conversation back to them, and when you ask them about when you say something, they kind of bring it back to them. But they also are kind of kind to somebody that when you ask them about them, they keep it to them. They have a need to be right. They have an excessive need to be admired. They think they're a big deal. They're arrogant and haughty. Which disorder am I talking about? Right. So this person is not a narcissist. Although today, 85% of my population is saying that their spouse is a narcissist, a covert one, a malignant one. Okay. I don't know that 85% of the world is. My bad. So the truth is each situation is different. So if you and I actually have one of these issues that's really over here and it's really, really hard, medicine can be sometimes liberating and wonderful. And the best choice, certainly with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, medicine is always the right choice first. With anxiety that's severe, for sure, like what I'm saying about slowing the game down, for some folks, with their biology the way it is or the level of trauma they've been through, they need additional healing agents to help slow the game down. Yay, that's what medicine's for. That's what other things are for. So we want to give different ways to find out how to slow the game down. That's because I think what we did in my field for quite a while, at least when I was really, really young, we kind of went to redirecting your thoughts first. And it's hard to do that when your brain's on fire, right? So we're learning more and more about how to slow the game down. And maybe we could have just looked at the scriptures and talked about, even Jesus said, hey, I'm going to be with my dad for a while, see ya, right? Even Jesus said, I need time, right? So we need to be able to slow things down because we get to do that. So these are still what I call defensive strategies when things get tough. What I also think is probably even as important, if not more important, is to proactively have positive strategies every day, right? So like when I'm dealing with a couple that's in a spin about same argument they've had for 235 years, and they just can't get through it, they can't redefine it, I can do role play for 4 weeks in a row. and then they leave and they still do the same thing. The best advice I've had is had each of them go and kind of sit down with God for a little bit and just look at themselves and say, what is it that I could be doing different versus reading up on my spouse and what a loser they are, right? So I'm going to work on my side of the street and just really, really practice that and do that and proactively visualize how I want to be there. And then maybe there's a little bit better chance. So it's the same way with offensive strategies with anxiety, meaning like what I get to start doing now is thinking about I hope it sounds okay to you, but thinking about the three things I'm most grateful for, the three things I'm most thankful to God for, the three things I love most about these specific loved ones in my life, the four things that happened today at work or with my grandkiddos or with a friend that were just really healthy and wonderful. Because I'm already over here looking at what if and looking at what didn't happen and what I better be afraid of and look out because bad stuff's going to happen because bad stuff has happened, right? So we have to, in my opinion, also run towards things that bring life to us. The best pain medicine we know actually that's non-medicinal is actually distraction, right? My left knee kind of gets to me once in a while. Worst thing I do is think about my left knee all day. Do PT, do what you got to do other things you're supposed to do, but then think about different things. So the offensive strategies with anxiety are also really wonderful ways we can treat that. A few minutes on what to do with children. So one of the biggest things we talk about in my field is, I've talked about risk factors with you. Even more importantly, we're talking now about what's called protective factors. How do we get ahead of things more? And actually, with most mental health issues, the strongest protective factor we know about is if the parent has some of those issues, it's actually for the parent to do the work, right? Because if I manage my anxiety, then the 1.5 of my 3 daughters that have that propensity, it's going to help them. If I get worried about what they're doing all the time, I'm just putting my stuff onto them. Does that make sense? So when I get it, when I look at my own stuff, that's the best protective factor we can have. That's the first thing. Make sense? The first thing is that. The second thing is walk alongside versus wear it. Walk alongside versus take it on. Todd, are you an idiot? I'm going to take it on. It's my kid. I go, I get it. It's one of those things where when we're taking it on, make sure the Holy Spirit's right there with you, watching you and helping you and guiding you, and have him do what you can't, and walk alongside. Validate, create a safe space. You want the home to be the safest space for that kid, whether they're 14 or they're 30 and in a horrible marriage and you don't like the spouse. And we're going to make sure we say that when they come home versus be the safest place. Be the person that's on speed dial for them. Create the safest place. It's not about coddling, enabling, spoiling. It's about empathizing, validating, hearing, and seeing their story. Because you know their story, right? If you have some of the same issues they have, well, you know their story because you've lived it. So let them in versus take it out on them. I think the other thing that you notice quite a bit with kind of the protective factors is, and I hope this sounds okay too, but really early diagnosis is helpful. Now sometimes you hear about the horror stories. Hey, my kid was on the wrong medicine when they were 8. We brought them into counseling too early. It was all a train wreck. Both those things could have been true, but still doesn't mean. So when we have somebody that has, the truth is they just have some anxiety stuff and it's there, and it's really impairing their functioning at school, with friends, all over. And we walk alongside them, we love them, we have empathy with them. I'm getting help myself. Let's see if we can get them some help. So they've got that trusted counselor, knows what she or he is doing, and is competent in that area, and becomes a safe place for them. And helps them learn as their brain is forming, right? some skills to redirect and restructure. So I'm a believer in early help and early diagnosis, and things change over time. It's not one diagnosis is there forever. Sometimes things evolve and things change. But I'm not saying it has to happen. I'm just saying it's another protective factor that we know is helpful. The other thing I would say, it kind of sounds like the first thing. The other thing we can do with parenting is have empathy versus codependency. So it's kind of like walk alongside versus taking. Empathy is that power move you and I have in Jesus to really see their story, see their pain, see their joys, and walk alongside them, empathize with what they're going through. And maybe you'll have pushback on this one, but more often than not, listen to understand versus fix, right? More often than not. Again, it depends on the age of the kid, depends on the severity. Each case is different, but especially as the kid's getting older, what I always tell people to do is like, remember what you needed the most from the parent when you were that age. Remember what you needed the most from, and it's different things for different people, right? Connection is certainly one of them. But most of that will be like just trying to listen, because sometimes just listening helps. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's other things. So each case is different. I'm done talking. I want to give some time for you folks to ask questions and interact. Thank you so much for being attentive. Appreciate it. What kind of, yeah.
I find myself, I don't know if it's seasonal affective disorder, but when it's a rainy, cloudy day, I think, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, And then if it's a sunny day, oh, I should do this, I should do that. It's very hard to get my head screwed around.
Yeah.
Or even a simple thing, I just have to make a phone call and ask a question. I'll stew on that for the longest time.
Yeah.
And once I do the call, I get the answer. Oh, well, that was easy.
Wow. You just redirected, didn't you? That was wonderful. Yeah, and I'm glad you talked about seasonal affective, because that's depression is episodic, but one of the gifts of living in Minnesota is usually we all get SAD in the mailbox. Oh, welcome to Minnesota. You get seasonal affective disorder. Whoa, welcome. Hey, thank you very much. So, and that's sometimes the episodes are really long. So the rumination stuff just hangs out. So I love what you talked about there. You just, what if, it's different based on the light, right? But I'm redirecting and going towards that. Vitamin D helps, right? And you're going to find, and one thing to remember for sure is like different things help different people, and try stuff till something works, right? It ain't the same thing for everybody, right? Yeah.
So there's a fine line, I think, between redirecting thinking
And avoiding, yeah. Yeah, tell me more what you're thinking there. Yeah, that's good.
my immediate thought of redirecting thinking is
Yeah. Yeah, great point, good clarifying moment. So, yeah, I'm not interested in like, okay, I'm not going to think about that because it's really hard, right? So what I'm talking about is what the redirection is when the body needs a break from it, because where we're redirecting to is not kind of la-la land, right? We're redirecting into actually what is true. Makes sense? So we're not redirecting into avoidance, to your great point, because otherwise it can be minimization, deflection, avoidance. Stuff, yeah. No, we're redirecting into an active thing, like here's what is true, here's what I'm going to do, this is what I'm for, right? So the 17 and a half minutes for me realize, that's enough there. What is true? What am I going to do now with it? So you're actively pursuing truth. Yeah, but thanks for that. That's a great point. I want to make sure we're not avoiding and deflecting and just like, hey, isn't it wonderful? No, it's hard. Yeah.
What's your experience, or if there's a young person that was never diagnosed with ADHD, they're kind of in high school, they're struggling with a lot of things you described, is it still appropriate maybe to start medication, or, at that point, is it not too late to start turning some of that around?
Yeah, because thank you for that question, because at least half of the folks that are adults with ADHD are, it's neurodevelopmental disease like autism, or it's just neurodevelopmental, so it's been developing. Okay, so it's very genetic. So if we missed it for the first 22 years and the person is kind of dealing with it, we usually notice like the 20s are a really difficult decade for people with untreated ADHD, and it can lead to lots of struggles as the brain is continuing to form. So wonderful question. It is never too late.
Can I just tag on to that?
Please.
Right after you're talking about ADHD, you're talking about bipolar disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Can be some similar symptoms.
Yeah.
At what age would someone start manifesting bipolar disorder?
Yeah. What we always want to know with bipolar is it's very genetic. So what's the truth about that, right? What is true? What is true about what we know about mom, dad, their biology, their history? What is true about an aunt and uncle? What is actually true? For example, if there's no bipolar disorder anywhere, we don't see it. What's hard to see is a generation ago, bipolar disorder might be like, grandma went away for a while, we're not sure why, or grandpa had a nervous breakdown a couple of times. We don't know what happened there. Does that make sense? So a generation ago, we might not have named it. Now we're getting, probably the next 10, 15 years, we're probably far enough ahead where we'll be able to name it from a generation ago. I'm sorry, did I answer that question? So what are the differences? Yeah, so pediatric bipolar is a thing. The other diagnosis we have now is called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, DMDD. And this is for people that have like constant, persistent is the word, persistent temper tantrums, but the truth is it's kind of budding bipolar. We used to have pediatric bipolar, so people are being diagnosed with bipolar early, and so some people say, that's horrible, how could you ever put that on somebody? Got it, okay, I hear you, but what is actually true? I mean, if what is true is that there's a family history of it, and we see, you got 4 kids, we see, oh golly, we see that mood dysregulation is so there, and we see it, we see that, we see you in your story, right, we see you. Right, I see you in that verse, like what's wrong with you? We see you, right? And so the other 3 have different things. They don't have that though. So it's probably that. We don't want to make the assumption, I don't want to and we had a bad experience on the medicine. When do you medicate, when don't you? I'm not a psychiatrist, so I refer for that. But the point is like, when I don't see kids under 14, now I'm getting too old, and they go, so I work 14 and above, but when I have colleagues that work with young kids, you still see pediatric bipolar. It's not a lot. I mean, bipolar prevalence is 1.2% right now for bipolar 1. I think 2% for 2% for bipolar 2. 1.2% for bipolar 2. 2 different expressions of bipolar. One is people that have mania for their episode, and it's really severe, it's significant, it's grandiose, it's reckless. Do lots of really kind of hallucinations, delusions, and maybe have a depressive episode. Bipolar 2 is crippling depressive episodes that are long, months, and we miss it and we think it's just depression. And then if they're not episodic there, which is they usually are, they're episodic in what we call hypomania. What I mentioned earlier, that anxious person that's a little bit jacked up a little bit, that can be what we call hypomania, shorter, less dysfunctional, doesn't cause dysfunction in the family. So we try to ferret out ADHD versus bipolar versus anxiety. What is actually true in the story, so we treat it appropriately. Well, I'm just saying, like you see the development, and again, hey, we don't want to overdiagnose, right? I mean, when ADHD came out, I'll never forget. We all went to seminars. ADHD? No, it's a boy under 5. Relax, right? So, and sometimes it is, right? So, what is actually true, right, about the story? Like, a parent's going through their own stuff, and they have depression in their family. And one of the children grows up in that same birth order for every single minute of every single day. They're in that birth order and in a squeeze. They're an introvert around 2 extroverts, and so they have kind of the depression stuff, but they're kind of freaking out, if you will, a lot. Was that bipolar? Well, actually, we don't see any history of bipolar anywhere, so it probably isn't. But let's see what ways we can find a unique lane for that kiddo and their story, and find places for them to belong, places for them to believe. See what we see in their evolution, spiritually, emotionally, and what does that do?
Can you continue on that? Having been through some significant evaluation and some things
I'll do my bit. Sorry.
Exploitation is a significant thing for me. And you mentioned Colombia and Tonto.
Yeah, so whenever we're dealing with families, great question, great thoughts. Whenever we're dealing with families, what we do is most therapists will believe in a systems theory, which is this is a system issue, it's not just a you issue, right? And we all have to work on our understanding our roles and be accountable and do less pointing of fingers and more looking in mirrors, right? And in my opinion, healthy familial counseling is more about, loving accountability and coming towards and having mutual empathy versus keeping score, right? And holding against, and seeing the person in their story and understanding if they had dementia, we probably wouldn't be treating them like that, right? So mental health issues, that doesn't mean the person is less than, right? It means the person is in pain, they're struggling.
Could you speak a little bit about autism spectrum and anxiety?
Sure. So I think we're getting there more with ASD. I love the fact that initially when it came out, yay, it's on a spectrum, yay. I think all mental health disorders will eventually be on a spectrum. That's the beauty of autism, is we're realizing that it is a spectrum. If you think about it, when somebody has that neurodevelopmental condition and whether they have difficulty, there's two domains with three main symptoms, right? The two domains are social interaction and social kind of cues is one domain that they battle, and the other domain is restrictive, repetitive interests and behaviors, which sometimes can be an amazing thing. They're a savant in a certain area. It's just amazing to watch. So I'm not an autism expert, but being a professor and teaching on it a lot and working with a lot of students who have autism, it's been interesting to hear some of their stories. I do reflection papers and it's interesting to hear their stories. I mean, I think we're learning more and more about the sensitivity of people with autism, just their sensations, right, and their reactivity to things. And so that's why we're learning more about different treatment strategies that might be more beneficial than behavioral. Not an either or, each case is different. But there's going to be a natural anxiety that comes along with that condition. Does that make sense? Like ADHD untreated does, right? They feel differently, right? And they're being treated differently on a regular basis, right? And so when they are very rigid and naturally lack the capacity naturally to empathize, like kind of naturally, people have to stop holding that against them and understand the condition they have, right? So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, someone had said that's even lower on the autism spectrum. It's like a continual high level of anxiety.
Sure.
The person is always
They're in that state. Yep. Yeah.
doesn't take a lot to get
Boom. Right. And that's that rigidity piece too. You notice like with autism, and rigidity means like they're too rigid. No, it's just a natural thing you have, like what you have with obsessive compulsive personality disorders. Lots of rigidity in that. When people have OCD, it used to be one of the anxiety disorders. We moved it somewhere else into its own area. But people with OCD have the same kind of like boom. It's heightened there, and certain things just trigger quickly neurodevelopmentally. So yeah, they walk with that constant anxiety. That's why it's usually high warmth, low criticism with all these situations. High warmth, low criticism, high warmth, low criticism, high warmth, low criticism for the caregivers as much as possible.
Environmental things, anxiety in Ukraine is pretty easy to understand in a lot of situations. You lost your heart and your house and your father and your right arm and whatever.
Right?
Environmental things. I don't know if you can speak to that environmental part. And then we have to take care of ourselves. And there are personalities also that want to take on taking care of ourselves. Sometimes I would maybe say an empath will take that on, but among people that do not do that part in situations,
No, that's okay. So the first one, yeah. So if I had an hour, we'd talk about social media and the impact, right? talk about COVID and the impact, talk about the war in Ukraine and the impact. The environmental stressors are legion, right? Still, what will matter the most amidst that is knowing that the home is a safe place where they can be who they are, and we're trying to figure it all out together because of what you're saying so well there, that everything is so loud in the environmental stuff. And people with anxiety take on stuff, so the empaths take on things more on social media more quickly. And so, but when you're walking alongside and you're the safest place, and you're driving them to a friend's house, even if it's 23 miles away, to be with somebody they enjoy being with, and it's a healthy place where they're navigating, they're not isolated. Again, you have another hour on that stuff. But when we think about how we manage our children with anxiety, the key factors are just knowing our own stuff, walking alongside, being there with them, not trying to fix. Because when we do that, then they know that we have a better chance of them knowing they're enough. But I cannot undersell how big of a deal anxiety is right now, and how the world we're in is intensifying that. But the best thing we can do as parents, in my opinion, is continue to know our own stuff well and walk alongside them through the story, and just be with them throughout. And through the great days and the hard days. And as we do that, then that traction really matters. And our time is up, and thank you for having me. Dan stood up, so it's usually time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Yes, let's thank you, Todd, for coming. Just so many different areas that we all deal with, and to step in and to have a handle or a place to go with those is amazing. And so thank you for that. Stacia, why don't you come up and share with us just a couple of the things coming up, the green folders on your table. And we're not meeting next week because of our Camps Woods Kids happening, but Stacia, highlight a few.
Sure can highlight a couple. So as Pastor Dan mentioned, we're not meeting next week, but the following week is already June 22nd. Oh my goodness. And that's an introduction to pickleball, and we have our own courts. I think it should be an introduction on how to not be hurt at pickleball, because I've been hearing a lot of injuries, but maybe that's what the cover is also. And then we will start out here and then go to the pickleball courts. And then the next one is the 29th, the basics of personal finance for students. So if you know any college students home for the summer, grab them while we can, or the parents thereof, and bring them for that. That's with Steve Woodley. And then I'll be talking about overcoming toxic thinking with a number of resources, but primarily focusing on the book Get Out of Your Head by Jenny Allen. And then the power of forgiveness with Pastor Brian, as he's back, of course, next week. So that'll be in July. So there are a couple of little teasers coming up, and we would love to have you spread the word and join us again.
Great.
Thanks for making it.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks for being here today.
Mm-hmm.